this way. Then I have to take, okay, I wonder, did I do it? Did I fix it? Oh my God. Oh my gosh. I hope that worked. Did that work? Please someone tell me it worked. Okay, great. Fantastic. Oh my gosh, this is so crazy. All right, I promise next week will be so much better after we work out the kinks and get all of the cobwebs worked out of this fun technology thing. So thanks for bearing with me there for a minute. So let's see who hung around and waited for us. All right, so Janice is here, Lisa's here, Janet and Janelle and Benita. Good morning. And Maria and Linda and who else am I missing? I think I got everybody. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. So what happened earlier, so it's been just a comedy of errors, not that you super care about what's going on over here, but I got up extra early this morning to make sure that the lights in the studio worked, all the cameras were running, everything was connected, and it was just kind of a hot mess. So I untangled all the cords, I got a new extension cord, I did all sorts of things, remounted the cameras, got everything in the right place, got everything hooked up. I thought everything was together. And then I go to start my computer. And of course, everything on the planet wants to upgrade. So I had to upgrade the streaming software, I had to upgrade the browser, and there was just all sorts of things. And then I remembered I needed an iron. So I went to plug in the iron and I blew I actually blew the surge protector. So that was a whole other thing. So I think that my microphone didn't quite recover from the surge protector. So now what I've done is the iron is on a separate circuit. So it's not on the same circuit anymore with the rest of the technology. I have learned my lesson. And it's funny because when you see this iron, it's just this really tiny little compact iron, but boy, does it pull a lot of juice when it's running. So it's on another circuit, so we shouldn't have to worry about that anymore. So this is so much fun. Awesome. I have an echo. And we want to get rid of the echo. And how do we do that? Because I cannot hear the echo. So I'm not sure. Oh, Maria, it's you. Okay. That's so funny. You know what can happen? Because I actually have this up on 3 devices to make sure that it's working. So I'm not running the video on the laptop, but I do see the chat window here, but I have it running on my mobile phone as well, so I can kind of pay attention. I was like, oh no, there can't be an echo. Please don't let there be an echo. Awesome. So looks like China Shepherd 44 is here. Hello, Kathy. Welcome. Awesome. Okay, so I think we're good. So this webinar is for Emma, the Emma Mystery Quilt-along. But what I like to do is, even though people are signed up for the Quilt-along, and you're welcome to sign up for the Quilt-along if you're interested, but I think we learn a lot of skills during the Quilt-along, and I like to share that out with everybody who wants to learn more. So this week we worked on some sewing and pressing skills. So we were dealing with strip sets and triangle in a square, and just learning about some pressing techniques and different techniques that you can use for sewing long strips and getting those pressed out and working together with those. So for those of you who are signed up for Emma, have you had a chance to look at the block for this week? I know it's actually 3 blocks this week. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at those. And what did you think? I know there were a few people who commented on Facebook that they really love the fabric. And so I actually brought one of the colorways here, and I should have brought both colorways, but I only brought one colorway here. And and for some people, this is a little bit crinkly, but some people ordered die cut kits. And so this is lesson 1 of Heartfield. So maybe next week I'll bring Donwell Abbey. But this is a Heartfield lesson 1. And anyone who gets a die cut kit, all of your kit components are broken up by block. and shrink wrapped. I actually didn't shrink wrap this set. I wrapped it, but I didn't do the shrinky part because I'm going to open it really soon anyway. So let's get this puppy open. And I don't have a tiny pair of scissors up here. So we're just going to have to improvise opening up this package. So let me actually switch to I can switch to the overhead camera here. Just a minute. Sorry, I got to reach up and touch the camera. All right, so we'll do this, and so hopefully you can see this. So we're going to go ahead and open up this packet here, and I like packing them this way because they're even though they're a little bit noisy, what I like about packing them this way is it still keeps the block a secret, but it also keeps the pieces nice and organized and flat. So just wanted you to see the wonderful fabric collection. This is Charlotte by Michelle Yeoh for Riley Blake. And it's really luscious. So you guys know me, right? I like to work with really super bright colors, but anytime we're working with a theme, I just get really geeked out over the theme. So this is not exactly reproduction fabric. It's not period fabric. I believe Emma was set like in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So this isn't period fabric or reproduction fabric, but I just really like the patterns and how they go together. And as soon as I saw this collection, it just screamed Emma to me. And when you see the final quilt, I hope that you agree that it is perfectly fitting for Emma, which is one of Jane Austen's books. So folks who get the die cut kits, I didn't leave everything in strip mode. I did for one of the block sets. I went ahead and cut those into squares, but I didn't want you to miss the opportunity to work with the strip sets. And actually, now that I think about it, Katrina, I completely told you the wrong thing. So this particular strip set is not something you're going to be able to. So I know I'm kind of having this conversation in my head. So there was a question on Facebook in our Facebook group, Designers and Makers Quilting Academy on Facebook. And one of the participants said, oh no, I'm going to have to, do some cutting before I take this over to to my die cutter. And I said, no, you should go ahead and piece your strip sets and then you can cross cut them on your die cutter. But actually, no, you can't, because I already cut up the strip set that we were using for that. So sorry, Katrina, I didn't mean to steer you wrong there. But awesome. So great. So let me just pop over here really quickly and just make sure that we don't have any questions popping up either here or in the Facebook group. Awesome. So Benita says, is it too late to sign up? And no, it is not. It is never, ever, ever too late to sign up for any of our mystery quilt events. Of course, once the event is over, then you're not you risk seeing the quilt, right? It's no longer a mystery once the live event is over, but it's never too late. And people are still working on, honestly, the very first quilt-along that I released in 2014. People are still working on those, and the patterns stay on the website, and they're yours for, as long as I can keep the website up, which is, until, I don't know, things, I need to have like an exit strategy for my business, right? So as long as my business website is up, you have access to those patterns. So you work at your own pace and you finish at your own pace. And obviously the Facebook group is always around, and the videos, you can replay these webinars as well. So that's great. So Janet asked a question. She said, is strip piecing required? I die cut it so I don't have to do that. Can I cut squares instead? So you can absolutely cut squares if you want to in advance. If you look at the photo tutorial in the pattern, I talk about how you can I show people how to rotary cut by stacking the strips and cutting them, and I'll show that in just a second. But you can also do that in your die cutter. So if you're doing 4 patches or 9 patches in particular, you can cut the strips on your strip cutter, sew your strip sets together, press them, and then nest or lay your sets right sides together and turn them 90 degrees on the die cutter, and then you can run them back through and cut your strip sets. And if you look at the photo tutorial on the in lesson 1, the lesson 1 photo tutorial, you'll see how I show how to do that for rotary cutting. And it's the same concept. You can do that same technique for die cutting. So that is kind of my little tip about doing strip sets. But certainly if you want to just work from squares, just working from squares, you can certainly do that as well. The one thing for the longer piece, so one of the blocks is actually a very long unit. I think I've got it in here. So one of the blocks, this was my sample piece. So one of the blocks is actually wider. It's wider than my video screen here, but this one isn't something that you could sort of well, you can't really die cut it first. I suppose you could if you were to cut like a 24.5-inch long piece, but there's not enough fabric in the pattern for you to use lengthwise grain. Plus, you don't need that many pieces. So I would say, for these, if you're going to die cut, go ahead and die cut your long strips and then sew them together. But to get this long unit, you've got to rotary cut that. So, and I showed on the photo tutorial also for this block how if you have a 24.5-inch ruler, I have a 24.5-inch by 8.5-inch ruler, and that's perfect because that's the size of this block. So that is what I use to cut that out. So that's great. So great questions. So Janet says, I understand about the bigger block, but the 4-patch, I plan to do squares. Yeah. So for the 4-patch, it's up to you. I personally like to strip piece my 4-patch units, press them, and then rotate them 90 degrees to run them back through the cutter. But those who got the die cut kit, like I said, I cut their squares apart for them. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about sorry, I'm just popping over to Facebook too to see if anyone has posted on there. And one thing also that I wanted to do was make sure to get the video for this posted in the classroom. So for folks who are on there, I will get that together next week and make sure that the video links are posted a little bit earlier. So sorry about that this morning. So like I said, next week will be so much better because now I remember kind of what I'm doing. Awesome. So we talked a little bit about the 4-patch. So I am going to do some sewing here and show you. So let's pop over to the sewing machine here, and I'm going to need to move my mic a little bit because I'm going to turn, and as I turn, the mic won't pick me up as well. Let me see if I can. I'm just going to adjust the settings and make sure. Awesome. So when I turn this way, you can still hear me. So I have my trusty handy dandy featherweight here. We love the featherweight. It's such a cute little machine. Let me make sure I've got my foot pedal in a good place. Come over here, Mr. Foot Pedal. Awesome. So featherweight is set up, and when we're working on 4 patches, so with this 4-patch, what I want to do is make sure that we press our seams in a way that will allow us to swirl them. And the way that this block goes together, it's actually a 4-patch that is 4 different patches. And the way that this block goes together, I should probably pull out my pattern so I know what I'm talking about. But this block is set up, so I believe it is this way. Okay, so it's these two, and then these two. So that's the 4-patch unit that I'm making. So I'm going to lay these right sides together. So these are just the same size squares that are laid out. And of course, I do not have my handy dandy seam guide. So this guy is not necessarily going to come out the size that I want because I don't have my 1/4 inch seam guide here. But you know what? This is just, I'm just sewing this. So you want to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we got to turn, we have to, oh, you know what will help? I have to actually plug in the, I have to plug it in. So that's the light switch. It doesn't work if you don't plug it in. So that's really important. First rule of sewing is to plug in your sewing machine if you want it to go. Awesome. That is working so much better than before. All right. So we've got that one. And then I like to chain piece. So we're going to add this next one right after. And of course, do what you need to do to get an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we do this, and because I love to chain piece, I like to make sure that, and of course, as I said, I didn't bring my pair of scissors up here, so we will take care of that. But I like to chain piece, so I rarely will take something out of the machine without putting something else in behind it. Awesome. So here are my 2 pieces, and I cannot claim at all that these are going to be accurate because I don't have a 1/4 inch foot on the machine, nor do I have a seam guide. So that's a little lesson for me. So let's switch over to the pressing station here. And what we've got with the pressing station is when we press these, so remember that the way that this is going together is this way. So what I want to do for these seams is nest them. And so the best way to nest them is to press them opposite sides. And the way that I remember that is I'm going to press both of these units toward the blue. And depending on the fabric kit that you have, you know, your fabric is going to be different. So in this particular case, this fabric is, I'm pressing toward the blue. So just in your pattern, you'll see which way to press. But when you are working with your own 4-patch units, whether you're working on Emma or something else, just remember you want to press the seams opposite. So just, you know, pick the side that you're going to press the seams to and just be consistent. So one thing that you can do, I've got a couple of pressing tools here. One is my wool pressing mat. And please note that this wool pressing mat is not directly on my cutting mat. I actually have a Steady Betty under here, under my wool pressing mat, because I do not want steam to go through and warp my cutting mat. So if you do have a wool pressing mat, make sure that you put it on a solid surface that is not your cutting mat. Okay, so we set the seam by just pressing down to set the seam, and then we're going to press our seam to the side. And we're pressing, not ironing, so you don't want to do a lot of back and forth. And then you should leave that alone to cool. But of course, because I have to teach you several things in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to go ahead and move that. Another technique to use is, oops, sorry about my arm there. Another technique is with a pressing stick. So this is the press bar or pressing stick. The strip stick is what the name of it is. And so I carry these on my website in several lengths. This is the 9-inch length, which is perfect for taking to class and for demos like this, but I have them all the way up to, I believe 44 inches, something like that, if you want to get those on my website. So the way to use the press bar for pressing your seams is you'll lay your seam on top of the press bar. It's nice and rounded across the top, and then pardon my arm here. And so again, it's a press down to set the seam, and then move your fabric out of the way and press it to the side. And again, it's just a press, and you can put your iron down and then of course leave that to cool. You really don't want to move these things around while you are, while they're sort of getting the seams in place. You really want to leave them put so they don't get distorted. But I don't have an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance, so distortion is kind of not a factor here. I'm really just trying to get to the step where I show you how to actually do the seam nesting. Okay, so let's get our blocks situated. So I've got one seam pressed that way, the other seam pressed this direction. So you can see that here. And so now I want to lay these right sides together. And again, if they match up and they're the same size, that will be quite great. But when we lay these right sides together, what happens is we get the seams to nest. Okay, so this seam is pressed so that it goes, the bottom seam goes this way, the top seam goes that way, and then I can move these together and wiggle them together and they will nest right there. And usually I will put a pin in the intersection, and I like to pin them with the pin at an angle. So I'm putting the pin in at an angle, and I'll tell you why I angle it this way. So that looks a little weird because it's angled down, but here's what happens when I go to sew. I'm sewing along this seam, and what happens is with the pin angled this way, I sew the seam before I get to the pin. So there's none of that distortion of stopping to take the pin out if I put the pin in straight. So I like to put the pin in at an angle that is opposite of my sewing direction so that I stitch the seam first and then I can take the pin out. You can also just go ahead and just chain piece these without having to worry about pinning them. That is also an option. And, I do that all the time. But when I do that, what I like to do, and sometimes it is not always possible, but what I like is if the bottom seam is facing me and the top seam is facing away from me, and then that way what happens as the machine is moving is I don't have to worry about that seam on the bottom flipping over the opposite direction, and I can also make sure that they wiggle together, but that's not always possible. So when it works out, it's great. When it doesn't work out, I use the pin. So here we go with the pin. So back to the sewing machine, and I will switch over to the sewing machine camera. So we're back here at the sewing machine, and again, it's another 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I have to remember to get my seam guide and keep it up here with the machine. And and I just told you don't have to remove the pin before you get to the seam, and I just took it out. So do as I say and not as I do. Isn't that the saying? Awesome. Okay, so there's that. And we're just gonna do our little leader here. And if I were smart, I would just go ahead and chain piece another unit in here. But hey, what can I say? Awesome. Okay, back to our pressing station here. So I have now stitched this seam, and I'm going to set the seam, okay, with the iron. And now I want you to take a look at the seams here. So these two seams, these are my original seams. This is the seam that I just stitched. And what I want you to notice is that if I press, so this seam is pressed to the left. If I press this seam down, this seam is pressed to the right, and press this seam up. Notice how those seams will all flow in a pinwheel. So I want to encourage the center to form that pinwheel. So I'm going to fold these back and see if I can get a little bit closer. I'm going to fold these back and just give it a little tug in the middle. Do you see how that seam opened up? So I gave that a little tug, and if you can see here in the middle, when I do that, it has opened up a little pinwheel. So, and it's actually a little miniature of the block that I just made. So it's a little 4-patch there in the center. And so now I can go ahead and I'm going to press that center flat, press the right part of the seam. I know this is upside down for you, but I'm going to press this side of the seam up and then the other side of the seam down. So I'll get that nice and flat and then press again from the front. And that's how I get my seams to not just lay flat here so I don't have this extreme bulk in the center, but look at how beautifully that center lines up. So those squares are just right, all those intersections are touching. So nesting those seams, making sure that you're pressing opposite on your first set and then getting your seams to swirl. This is one technique that took me months and months to understand. I think I watched somebody do it in a video and I said, what the what? And I didn't understand it and it took so long for me to get this. So if you don't get the swirling seams, I think I do this every quilt along. I show this swirl seam technique. So if you haven't gotten it yet, don't panic. If the light bulb just clicked for you, that's super fantastic. If you've been swirling seams for months, good for you. But it's always something that I love to share because it's something that took me a while to get. So if it takes you a while to get, don't worry about it. If you still don't get it, just keep watching. All right, so I'm going to hop back over here to our little window and see if we can see what questions people have. I know I just went through this whole demo on sewing and swirling, but let's see. Okay, so Lisa says, what are the pros and cons of using a pressing stick versus a wool mat or a flat surface? That is such a great question. So for me, I like to use the right tool for the job. So for me, what is the biggest advantage of the pressing stick is for pressing seams open. And I love to press, when I'm pressing seams open, I love to do them on the strip stick. So let me do I have something that's got seams pressed open? And okay, let's see. So I don't have something ready-made, but I can just come here and let me show you the pressing seam open and what's so great about that. So part of it is just, I could tell you, but it's better to show you. So when pressing seams open, so what's great about the strip stick is I can put my seam right over that top bar. And do you see how the fabric just kind of lays off to the side? And when I'm laying this, flat, of course, this is a flat surface. But what I have to do when I'm sneaking my iron in here is, try to maneuver and open the seam. And when I'm pressing this, it tends to get the impression of the other two fabrics when I'm doing that. What's great about doing it on this surface is that I'm not fussing with all the other stuff that's going on. So just imagine if I had, or don't imagine, I'll just show you, I have a block here that's got other seams going on, and it's more obvious when you're pressing like a block that's got a lot more pieces in it. But if I'm here on this, on this flat surface, what's happening is now I'm having to avoid, if I want to press the seam open, now I have to avoid all these other seams that are, that are in here. Where if I'm doing this on the pressing stick, those other seams are out of my way, right? And so on top of here, I'm not having to pay attention to this seam here on the back side because it's flopped off to the bottom. So that's one reason I like using the pressing stick, is because it elevates the seam that I'm trying to press and it lets the other seams fall away to the side. Now, what's great about a wool pressing mat and, or a Steady Betty, so a couple of advantages to these guys. So the wool pressing mat, what's great about the wool is that it is retaining the heat and the little bit of moisture that these pads just kind of naturally absorb from the environment. And it's reflecting that back to your fabric. So you're kind of getting more of the heat instead of the heat dissipating into the ironing board, it's reflecting back to the unit. And so you're getting a better press. Okay. It's a better press and a firmer press, and you're more likely to be successful pressing without moisture, steam, or spritzing with fabric or spritzing with starch. So, and when I'm sewing, I don't like to introduce moisture into my fabrics after I've already cut them. So if I'm going to introduce moisture into fabrics, if I want to starch them, for example, I'm going to do that when the fabric is still in whole yardage. And then once I cut it for the quilt, there's no more moisture coming into this unless I need to do some serious manipulation of the unit. So that's why I like to use the things like Steady Betty or the wool pressing mats. Now, one thing, I guess, the wool mat versus the Steady Betty, and why I kind of have both. Well, one, I had the Steady Betty first, and then these wool pressing mats came out. And so, trying to decide like which do I like better. So what's great about the Steady Betty is that when your block is on the Steady Betty, it doesn't move or shift. It's kind of it's a little bit stuck there. So when you're pressing, you're not getting that distortion because the block is not moving as you're pressing. It stays put. The foam freaks me out because you think, oh my gosh, foam, it's going to melt. It doesn't melt. It's an amazing product. So love that. It's also on a wood base, and so even though I'm on my cutting surface, I don't have to worry about with this the heat kind of going through and messing up my cutting mat. So the wool mat is newer to me, so I just need to get a little bit more experience with it, but it's nice and thick. I like it. I don't know which one I like better, frankly, but they each have their purposes. But that's how I use. I think, one of my favorite tools is the strip stick, and then, having these little pressing mats right by your sewing machine is really great as well. Okay, so let's see if anyone else has questions here while we go. And let's see. Oh, look, it is the Zakis family. Hello, Sarah. Hi, Andrew. Hi, Andy. And hello, Zoe. So that's so great. I hope you guys had pancakes this morning. So this is so much fun. All right. So if you guys, some of you may remember Sarah, sometimes she comes over to the studio and helps me with all the technical things. So at least making sure the sound works, which we ended up figuring out this morning. So that's great. All right. So I'm just checking the Facebook group to see if we have any questions that have been posted. And let's see. All right. So let's see here. It doesn't look like there are questions posted to Facebook. All right, so coming back to the group here. Oh, look, it's Catherine Finney. Hello, hello. Oh, look, the family is eating pancakes. That's great. Okay, so that's the tip that I was showing. So the swirled seams and the pressing stick, that's great. We talked in the pattern. So in this week's pattern, we did a long strip set. Okay, this thing is super long, minus the 24 inches that I cut off. And so what I did with the strip set, so if you can imagine, you have fabric and all your fabric is 40 inches long, and you want to be able to make a long strip set and cut your long pieces off. Well, what happens is if you, and the reason for this is the block that we cut was 24.5 inches long. So if you have a 40-inch strip and you cut off 24.5 inches, you don't have enough fabric then to cut another block. So it's wasteful. You're wasting, probably, 15, 14 inches of fabric, something like that. 16? I don't know. Don't make me do math, you guys. I think it's 16. So you've got 16 inches of fabric that you just wasted because you wanted a whole piece without seams. And, I debated about this. I'm probably still going to debate whether or not, even though it is wasteful of fabric to do that, whether or not just visually not having seams in that unit is going to be better. But I don't like to be super wasteful if I can help it. So what I suggested was, hey, stitch your strips together, stitch the like strips together first. So this center strip gets pieced together. So piece that together first in your other long strips and then sew them together and make a long strip set. Well, what happens then is if your fabrics are all kind of 40 inches, 40-ish inches, what happens then is your seams will fall in the exact same place. So what I suggested and I didn't do this in the pattern, I did this in the photo tutorial, but what I suggested is, so, here are the 6 strips, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so you need 3 strips for each side. So what I suggested in the tutorial is that instead of just stitching all 3 of these together and also all 3 of your center strip together, take 1 or actually 2 of your strips. So it's 1 strip in each of these set of 3 and cut them in half here. So what will happen is if I cut this one, and again, I don't have a good pair of scissors here, so just bear with me while I just kind of fake cut these quickly. Okay, so if I cut this in half, so this is my 40-inch strip cut in half, so now I have 2 20-inch strips. So then what you do is you take your 2 40-inch strips and you stitch them together, and then you put 1 20-inch on each end. So you have a 20, 40, 40, 20. And what that does is your center piece is 40, 40, 40, and your outside pieces are 20, 40, 40, 20. So it's like making a brick wall. So what that does is it staggers the seams. So if you see here on this unit, these 2 outside strips have seams, and yes, their seams are kind of slightly offset because the exactly in half thing doesn't always work out. But what happens is my 2 outside strips then have a seam where the center strip does not. So can you see that? Maybe if I switch to the other camera, that will be a little bit more, I can make that a little bit more obvious. So my outside strips, these 2 strips have seams and the center does not. And I know it looks like that's a seam, but that's actually a wrinkle that I didn't press. So that is staggered. And then if I go along this more, you can see here where the center strip has a seam and the 2 outside units do not. So there's a seam there. There's no seam there. So when you do that and stagger the seams, it just makes it a little bit easier for this to go together. And then it's also not as distracting to have the seams in the same place. So here's my first 24-inch, or it's 24.5 cut, but I end up with just 1 seam on these 2 outside edges and no seam here. And you can see this a little bit better from the back. I know it looks like there's a seam there, but it's just a wrinkle that I did not press out. But so here are my 2 seams on the outside edge and not in the center. So that is that's in the photo tutorial. It talks about staggering seams in long strips, because if all your strips are the same size or the same length and you stitch them together, you're going to end up with seams kind of in the same place. So that's what I would do to stagger that seam, is just cut 2 of the strips in half and then sew the half on either side of the long strip. So hopefully that gives you a good idea there. So I have had a ton of fun. So it looks like, so Catherine says she's looking forward to cutting fabric. It's lovely. Thank you so much. So Lisa says this was super helpful about seams and strips. I'm so glad that you found that helpful. Janet says thanks for showing that about the seams. You are so welcome. So here this week I've got to cut the webinar just a little bit shorter now, because I actually have a conference call, if you can believe it, here on Saturday morning. So I'm going to take that call, but I have had such a great time. Thanks for sticking with me through our technical difficulties this morning. I promise to try harder next week to eliminate the technical difficulties, but I can't promise not to have any. That is a thing that happens with technology. But we are up and running and working, and everybody made it who was supposed to make it, or the people who, no, I don't even want to say that. Everybody who made it, great job. If you didn't make it to the live webinar, I apologize. I will take that as my responsibility, unless you were like driving or something, in which case, that you can just watch it later. But anyway, I've had a ton of fun. Thank you so much, you guys. It's been a blast. So we'll see you next week. And if you want to watch the replay, the link will go up on the website pretty soon. And if you want to sign up for Emma, just go to my site, lovebugstudios.com, click on the classes and events. You'll see Emma and the class, click on that and the class registration is there. So have a ton of fun. Hope you love the blocks and get to sewing. And I can't wait to see you post them in our Facebook group. All right. Have fun, everybody. Bye-bye.